graduate students. All right. We have one undergraduate student with us. And how many of you are graduate students? All right. And how many of you are professors, researchers? Okay. And how many of you are staff, administration? Okay. Hello, how are you?
How are you, Mike?
It's good to see you. Okay, and then here's another question. How many of you saw through the repellent fence yesterday? Okay. Was it yesterday? Oh, but you've seen it, but it's been screened here, right? Yesterday, last night. Okay, cool. All right. That's helpful to know. And how many of you are from abroad? All right, yeah, this is a good group. And how many of you are from the West Coast? Okay, from the Midwest? From the Southwest? From the South? From the North? All right, did I cover, how about, well, the West Coast, I guess it covers everything. Okay, that's great. That's great. And how many doctoral students do we have in the room? Okay. And how many master's students? Okay. Very cool. Yes.
Are you okay with photographs?
Yes, I'm okay with photographs. Well, I just feel like I should shake your hand. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for coming all this way.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
I'm sorry, I was taking care of our harvest this morning.
Oh yeah, that's really important.
So I'll show you the seeds later.
Oh,
okay.
Thank you. Well, I want to tell you things, but I don't want to do any spoiler alerts. I mean, I don't want to do any spoilers, but I can tell you a few things. I work at the San Francisco Art Institute in San Francisco, California, and I teach. There's about 24 students in my department, undergraduate students, and about 4 MFA students in my graduate students in my department. And the San Francisco Art Institute is one of the last contemporary arts colleges, just strictly a contemporary arts college in the United States. The other ones are Cal Arts is another one, and then there's the Art Institute of Chicago, and the San Francisco Art Institute. A couple of important things about that institute. It was a place where murals were commissioned by Diego Rivera, and so Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo were professors there. But also one of the first exhibitions of contemporary American Indian art was held at the San Francisco Art Institute. It was also an important site of the Black Panther movement, And it also was the first program where photography was situated as an art, fine art. And that program was started by Ansel Adams. And the San Francisco Art Institute has this very rich legacy. Mark Rothko was a professor there, and just many great artists along the way. I'm trying to think about someone more recent. Annie Leibovitz went to school at the San Francisco Art Institute, and so it's got this really beautiful, very rich heritage, and it's really nice to have an opportunity to contribute to that legacy. And so a lot of what I do, although I'm the chair of art and technology, which is a really interesting place to be because the Bay Area, the San Francisco Bay Area, is a sort of epicenter of innovation because we have all the major tech companies and startups there, and so I sort of see myself as a sort of liaison for my institute and tech companies, and doing that very, very delicate negotiation between discourses and value systems. This sort of discourse of this sort of vanguard type of institution in relationship to corporations that are literally taking over the world, influencing the world, and querying all your personal information, including your emotional states. And so it's a very, very tricky place to be. And at the same time, to make matters even more complicated, is that I'm an Indigenous person in the middle of all that. And so it's been a really interesting experience for me. I've been there for only about 2.5 years. And I'm in a very early stages of building a program for the school. Even though the school has been historically a very innovative, very cutting edge, but also very cutting politically, it shocked me how it was also very conservative in the end, because it didn't have the, at some point along in its history, it lost its ability to predict emergent media, to be out in front of emergent media. So it was doing that with Ansel Adams, and it did it with George Couchard with film, but then it failed to see the emergent digital media. And that's had a lot of serious consequences for the school. And so I'm there trying to straighten it out. Does anybody want to share with me anything you're up to here at Cornell? If you feel compelled, or not too shy, or yeah.
I'm Ariel Estrella.
Pleased to meet you.
English PhD.
Okay.
I study queer color lyricism,
Okay.
and mostly poetics, but all of that aside, that I just started learning to embroider.
Oh, that's great.
And I started a monthly collage night for me and my cohort and friends.
Right on, right on. Excellent. Anybody else? Come on, don't be shy. I'm gonna do a lot of heavy lifting for you. Come on, give Give me a story. Somebody, tell me a story. All right, all right. Yes.
Hi, I'm Fran.
Hi, Fran.
I'm a second-year PhD student in the linguistics department.
Excellent.
Possibly quad.
Yeah.
And I am interested, and I work on Indigenous communities out in Montana
Okay.
and in the Pacific Northwest.
Okay.
So I work on those languages and hopefully with the communities.
That's excellent. So my doctorate is in linguistics. So yeah, I love linguistics. I saw another hand.
Hi.
Hello.
Sorry, I'm Cara.
Cara.
I'm a Master's of Public Administration candidate
Okay.
in Science, Technology, and Infrastructure Policy.
Oh, right on.
I also graduated from Cornell Class of 19 with a Bachelor's of Science in Materials Engineering.
Okay. Excellent.
And my professional role is to combine the two to lead development in Southeast Asian technology and infrastructure.
Oh, that's really excellent. My doctoral, my dissertation was on Indigenous technological sovereignty. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. But thinking a lot about both the colonial potential as well as the potential for self-determination and sovereignty with, respect to in relationship to indigenous media. And I had done consulting work in different parts of the world around what you're going to be diving into. And it's really, I have a lot of things to say about it. But that's a very important and exciting direction. Yeah. Anybody else? Am I supposed to start at 1? Is that when I'm supposed to start, or am I like chewing up valuable time here?
This is kind of a new format for us.
Oh, okay.
And so you're the first person to actually.
Oh,
enact
heck
it.
yeah. All right.
So,
Great.
we do have a little time after this talk.
Okay. Well, I need to get.
For you to talk with the students in
Okay.
the who are enrolled in the speaker series
Okay.
seminar.
Okay, great. Should I go ahead and get started?
Yeah, I think so. We have some guests here from other
Okay.
programs that
Okay.
may or may not be able to stay with us, but everybody's welcome to stay.
All right.
Uh,
All right, excellent. Well, I'll just get started. So I didn't know what to expect, and I live a very busy life. I travel a lot, and I do a lot of different work in my travels. Sometimes they're talks like this, and other times I'm working on commissions. And I'm doing consulting for institutions, and so I never really know. I always sort of kind of have an idea of where I'm going, but I never fully know what to expect. And I kind of like it that way. I've kind of learned to really live, just day by day. I'll see what happens. When I get up tomorrow, I'll get myself ready for tomorrow. And until then, I'm not going to worry about it. And but I prepared for like a larger crowd. And then I came here and I was like, oh, this is going to be a nice intimate crowd. And so when I'm in an intimate situation, it's a lot more informal because I can actually like see you, like be proximate to you, talk with you. And so this presentation is a little bit formal, but what I'll do is I'm gonna break off script. I'm gonna make it as sort of personable as possible, as opposed to being on a stage in an auditorium. So I'll just start out with good afternoon. My name's Cristobal Martinez, and I didn't know if you wanted to introduce the lecture series. I might actually be getting out in front of you, but if not, it's okay. I mean, I can.
Well, I'm Jolene Rickard. I'm the chair, the director of the American Indian and Indigenous Studies program. And I'm also faculty in the history of our department at our department. And so I first encountered his work in New York City. I knew about his work, but I encountered his brilliant mind and presentation with Fox in New York City at the New School. And so I've been after him for 2 years to make time in his calendar to come and talk with us. And so the speaker series is meant to bring new ideas at the intersection of indigeneity and all other areas of discourse in the academy. And I felt that that's certainly what you did or demonstrated in the pieces that I saw at the New School. And so I just want to welcome you here and
Thank you.
Here we have a broad section of faculty and students here from across the university. And I have to say, although our numbers are small, they're very potent.
Oh yeah, you bet, you bet. And I do prefer this kind of environment. And so by no means a critique. So we're gonna dive in pretty quick and pretty hard, okay? So I'm an artist scholar, as I was sharing with you, based in San Francisco, California, and where I'm chair and assistant professor of art and technology at the San Francisco Art Institute. I'm also an artist in the interdisciplinary Indigenous collective Post-Commodity, and I'm also an artist in 2 other Indigenous collectives, Radio Healer and Red Culebra. And so in the spring of 2015, I completed my PhD at Arizona State University, where I wrote theories of media within the context of Indigenous self-determination and sovereignty. And so I'm really honored to be here with you today to present this talk, Art is Tecpatl, a flint knife tongue. But before I get started, I want to thank you, the Rectora Jolene Rickard, thank you. Interim Associate Director Ula Piasta Mansfield, and the American Indian and Indigenous Studies program here at Cornell University for this opportunity to share my art, ideas, and aspirations with you as part of the AIIS speaker series. I want to acknowledge that we're on the ancestral homelands of the Gayogohó Nation. I also want to express my gratitude and appreciation to the Gayogohó, whose homelands on which I've been invited to share knowledge with you today. And I want to thank all of you for being here with me. I do also want to thank my beloved partner, my wife Meredith Martinez, who is celebrating her birthday today. Yeah, and this is a really important thing because I've been married for 14 and a half years, and my partner and I, we built a lot of this together. A lot of what I get to share with you today has to do with a partnership that is fiercely built upon a really strong commitment. And so what I'm going to do in this talk is I'll focus on 2 opportunities for critical thinking within art making, and then conclude with an artist's manifesto. And so more specifically, I'll start by connecting the work of the Indigenous hacker and performance collective Radio Healer to theories of Indigenous media in order to demonstrate the relationship between Indigenous knowledge systems, emergent technologies, and Indigenous sovereignty. And then I'm going to shift over to discuss a critical Indigenous methodology for confronting social, political, and economic issues through post-commodities repellent fence and document of 14 commissions. And lastly, I'll share with you what I believe are the key elements required for arts pedagogy, as well as for artists to aestheticize complex ideas about the world. I'm going to share with you what I think is at stake, and I'm going to share with you what I think we need to be doing in order to address many of the exigencies that we're facing today, and certainly that the generations to come will be facing with greater, what I'm anticipating and many researchers are anticipating will be with greater intensity. As I continue to advance and transform through my work, the one thing that remains absolutely constant to me is the place where I'm from. So my place of origin is important in relation to the work that I'm going to share with you today. Most simply because what I'm about to present includes values of the community by which I was raised. With that said, I am alcaldeño, a mestizo del pueblo de Alcalde, located in north central New Mexico. This is important because I'm presenting the perspective of an indigenous mestizo and a scholar. This multi-positional perspective is extended where I myself am contributor to productions that are situated in relationship to the place where I'm from, and my artist and academic role as an observer, producer, maker of rhetoric, theory, and intermedia art as critical media production, all of which are woven together throughout my work. So to get started, I want to provide a little bit of context by addressing my use of the term indigenous. In this presentation, I use this word to refer to diverse peoples throughout the world who, since time immemorial, continuously inhabit lands inherited from ancestors who were the first to reside on a given geography. I also use the word indigenous to refer to those such as the people of the Cherokee Nation who were geographically relocated by military colonial force, and those such as the indigenous peoples of Latin America who are retracing their ancestral migration and trade routes as a result of inequitable binational economic policies and corporate activities. In the next few slides, I'll present a couple of digitally mediated working examples by indigenous collectives originating in the southwestern United States. As mentioned, these groups are Post-Commodity and Radio Healer. Together, these indigenous collectives comprised of artists, engineers, and rhetoricians create discursive media productions that are designed to catalyze and connect narratives of indigenous cultural and political self-determination throughout the world. The critical media productions that I present today were all established within the context of place. So place matters in my work. Once again, it's important for me to note that I'm an artist in Post-Commodity and Radio Healer, reflecting the values of where I'm from. My work is almost always situated through co-intentional collaborations within diverse publics. So one of the deepest concerns I have about contemporary art is not only its capacity to encourage heightened levels of criticality within and across public spheres, but that producers are critical of the implications of mediums themselves. So for example, over a decade and a half, there has been an intense excitement in the learning sciences about digital media and a belief that this speedy emergent media revolutionizes the way by which we learn. However, from an indigenous perspective and within an indigenous context, I think it's important for us to take a step back and reflect upon a definition of literacy, which is a word that commonly refers to reading and writing. Reading and writing is a technology, according to linguists, it's been with us anywhere from about 8,000 to 10,000 years. Although many take literacy for granted as something positive, It remains important to remember that literacy, like all tools, can be used along the continuum of creation and destruction. We most often focus on literacy as something positive. However, it's important for us to acknowledge that literacy is historically implicated as a culturally destructive tool, as it was once weaponized to force the assimilation of indigenous peoples. For those indigenous peoples who don't believe that we exist in a quote-unquote post-colonial world, unless it is adapted and self-determined by indigenous peoples, literacy runs the risk of remaining a force of colonization. The colonial intentions to use schooling and literacy were never stated more clearly than in the 1870s, when founder and superintendent Richard Henry Pratt of the Carlisle Indian School stated explicitly that the role of education among American Indians was to assimilate them into Western ways of knowing and being. Pratt is famously quoted as stating that the point of assimilation was to kill the Indian to save the man. Now, within the context of colonization, new literacy studies raises what I feel are alarming issues when it comes to digital media. The intellectual leadership of the New London Group has provided us with a framework arguing that literacy is more than just reading and writing, but that it includes other modalities of communication and embodiment as well. So one of the most recent concepts of literacy is referred to as digital literacies, which encompass everything from the ability to navigate a multimodal website to writing computer code. Now, within a new literacies framework, we can think about digital literacy as literacy version 2.0. It's probably like 6.0 by now, but it's just not just the encoding, decoding, and comprehension of text, but the reading, writing, and interacting with sounds, still images, moving images, haptics, various forms of XR. Given the colonial history of literacy, for example, in the United States, what does the pervasiveness and proliferation of literacy 2.0 mean for Native Americans? So if we think about diversity reports from Google and other tech giants, we see that indigenous peoples are clearly left out of ideation processes when it comes to the design of consumer media technologies. And let's not forget that consumer media technologies are wired into the military entertainment complex. And the fact that, that indigenous peoples are not part of this ideation, the ideation of emergent media, helps to frame the argument of pervasive media as a colonizing force, embodying the worldviews of mostly young white men. And now, despite this colonial divide, there remains a powerful possibility for indigenous peoples to flip the script. And now, so there's been a lot of efforts afoot. I mean, it was very embarrassing for Google, and it was very embarrassing for Facebook, and all these tech giants, once they were pressured to release their diversity reports, they demonstrated to the world, that it was a mess. And so this was about 5 years ago. Since then, they've made a tremendous progress on diversifying their workforce. The problem is that there's a difference between diversity and equity across diversity. And so what I'm talking about here is I'm not talking about hiring people of color. I'm not talking about getting brown bodies in there and then being able to show the pie chart that we've fixed this situation. What I'm talking about is that it's more than just bodies. It's about worldview. And it's about how worldview influences the emergence of technologies. That's what's missing. And so people of color might get hired into these companies, but they're assimilated to the culture of these companies. And so despite this colonial divide, there remains the powerful possibility for indigenous peoples to flip the script. So to do so, indigenous scholar Scott Richard Lyons asks a rhetorical question: what do American Indians want from writing? Which is a question that can be updated to literacy version 2.0 to go something like this: what do indigenous peoples want from digital literacies? The following worked examples suggest that Indigenous peoples want to use digital literacies to establish critical media productions that help to control law, pedagogy, and aesthetics, and probably healthcare. Indigenous aesthetics, meaning the encoding of Indigenous values, are what Indigenous education scholar Brian Brayboy refers to as what a people believe to be good, beautiful, and true. So as history also goes, many Indigenous writers have successfully reimagined reading and writing and have used it to operationalize their sovereignty through expressions of their own aesthetics. The following worked examples will demonstrate evidence of cross-cultural Indigenous collectives comprised of both Native Americans and Indigenous Americans throughout our hemisphere doing exactly the same thing with media. Well, not just digital media, but through what I refer to as an Indigenous convolution media. Not convolution as in convoluted, but a kind of media, a kind of physical, Indigenous ceremonial, and digital media, all intertwined, woven, and spiraling into Indigenous reimagined ceremony. Now, the following critical media productions were created through processes of salvaging, hacking, modifying media. Let's take a look at this. To get into the first working example I want to share with you, let's look at this collage for a second. So together, these images, they demonstrate a discourse articulating what technology marketing scholar Robert Casanetz refers to as a techtopian worldview of technology. So in terms of technology and utopia, techtopian values espouse that technological advancement is the natural order of human progress, not unlike Manifest Destiny. And according to G, Hull, and Lancashire in the New Work Order, this perspective tends to include critical reflection on the effects of technology. So within the ideology of techtopia, what does it mean for Indigenous peoples when cutting-edge digital media technologies only seem to mirror a Manifest Destiny vision of urbanization superimposed upon Indigenous peoples' sacred ancestral homelands? To answer this question, the Native American and Chicano-led Hacker Artist Collective, Radio Healer, currently seeks to engage by creating ceremonial tools like these electronic musical instruments created to perform reimagined ceremony. In Radio Healer, emergent Indigenous ceremonial media, both older and newer, provide a critical context, offering diverse audiences handles by which they can engage in critical media literacies discussions about the role of digital media in their everyday lived experiences. Radio Healer provides audiences with opportunities by which all peoples may consider the implications of digital media on how we view ourselves, each other, relationships, terms of engagement, and the places we inhabit. To achieve this, Radio Healer performs Indigenous reimagined ceremonies with electronic and acoustic instruments. And to prepare for ceremony, Radio Healer produces software and aesthetically symbolic electronic and acoustic ceremonial tools, musical ceremonial tools that are designed to mediate the collective's live performances of moving images and sound. Radio Healer applies Indigenous intercultural knowledge systems such as Chicanx Rascuache, Lowrider Chop Shop, and Native American adaptive reuse traditions for the design, construction, and practice of their tools. And you can look at this slide and say, yeah, I associate that with being traditional, but I mean, look at it again. You got a tin can rattle, you got Pueblo elk calls made out of galvanized pipe. So, this has been going on since time immemorial. trading ideas, trading knowledge, encountering and accessing new materials and doing things with these materials. These traditions demonstrate adaptations in design and use of foreign cultural artifacts and materials, as well as local materials, to innovate a culturally responsive ecology of functional and aesthetic musical instrument technologies that, through aesthetics, encode radio healers' discourse. All the electronic instruments featured in these slides were constructed, again, via circuit bending, appropriation, salvaging, coding, recycling, adaptive reuse, and pragmatic/extemporaneous design. As they mediate visual, sonic, and discursive complexity, these implements operationalize the collective's indigenous sovereignty. They are the radio healer's self-determined adaptations of materials and tools. Through their immersive environments comprised of moving images, tools, regalia, performance, and sound, Radio Healer bends media to position visual and sonic metaphors that make the familiar strange, evoking a heightened sense of criticality about the systems we create and maintain in our world. For example, in the recent work titled Animal Mother Moves the Four Winds of Rush Hour, Radio Healer presupposes the following about the desert city, Phoenix, Arizona, one of the most unsustainable places on Earth. Pulling from the power of punk, industrial, goth, metal, and indigenous knowledge systems, Radio Healer's death ceremony is charged with both market driving and market-driven metaphors of sex, speed, violence, discipline, exploitation, pyromania, and transformation. In Animal Mother, these metaphors originate from cityscape, semiotic systems that engage the movement of rush hour. When traffic speeds increase, the street becomes noisy and blurry, frenetic markets, high-speed internet, fast car crashes, and virtual reality pornography. As traffic slows down, signs on the street become legible, and like denial of service, fast is not possible, lowriders viable, and street culture visible. In this system of rush hour, in which there is no off, we are weaponized, surveilled, and market valorized. Today, in the desert city, rush hour is infinitely dominant, remaining irreverent to the sovereignty of context, history, myth, and time. Rush hour is a scorching hot, so slow and fast moving parking lot of battery acid and burning gasoline after a hell of a long day at work. Rush hour, born of Animal Mother, remains emergent. So, we kind of get to see what indigenous technological sovereignty or self-determination looks like for an indigenous collective. We get to see how indigenous collectives are bringing a level of criticality to emergent media, while at the same time bridging or remaining emergent with materiality and ideas, adapting. But this is abstract. Artists are doing the work of abstracting the world. But let's look at what it really is about from a really pragmatic standpoint. So take a look at this. So this is what happens when the context is not abstract, but about everyday health, wellness, and living. So take a look at this image of Navajo engineer Garrett Yazzie. This young man figured out how to build a super efficient heater that simultaneously heated his parents' home and water without producing any ecologically harmful byproducts. Garrett produced this technology out of a need to respond to his sister's asthma, which was exacerbated by the coal his family had little choice but to burn during the winter months. Now, Garrett is on the Navajo Nation. What's remarkable about Garrett's work is that he produced it using soda cans and a car radiator. Garrett brings indigenous traditions to his convolution media as he flips the script with seeming shamanic wisdom by creating a medicine for his sister as he reimagines containers that were once full of poisonous soda and antifreeze. Through salvage, hacking, and modification, Garrett's innovation is an affordable heater made of aluminum cans and an old car radiator. Furthermore, Garrett's technology mitigates the environmental impact to his sacred ancestral homelands by replacing coal with solar energy. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit. So we still have hacking going on here. So let's look at this balloon. I want to extend and complicate the conversation by thinking about the connections between radio healer and post-commodities work. And so after having shared with you some ideas about the relationship between indigenous knowledge, literacies, and technology and art, this next example provides us with another opportunity to consider art's potential role in engaging social, political, cultural, and economic spheres. So speaking of spheres, let's start with this image of a scare eye or repellent eye balloon. So a scare eye balloon, it's a beach ball sized ineffectual bird repellent product. It's something you can find at Home Depot or Lowe's. If you have a bird problem at your house, like maybe like a flock of pigeons is like shitting all over your driveway, or there's like birds who are like eating your fruit. You can go to the hardware store and buy a few of these and like hang them up in your tree. And if you can't find them at Home Depot or Lowe's, don't worry about it. You can always go to Amazon. And so the thing about this balloon is that we find it a very humorous object. It's also a very serious business. But what happens with it is when you buy it, and you'll hang it up and you'll scare the pigeons away. But birds are really smart, and so it could be an hour, it could be a day, but when you come back, you'll find that the birds have returned and they're throwing a party on your balloon. And not only are they throwing a party on your balloon, but you might be surprised to see the balloon covered entirely in bird shit. And, we think this is a really funny thing, and it's also really dark. There's something really dark about it. And, but there's something really much more to it. I mean, when we think about the fast capitalist narrative associated with this balloon, it's dark. It is funny. But it's also, there's another meaning. We think that this balloon could potentially be one of the most important indigenous ready-mades of our time. Because when you look at it, you look closely at it, you realize that it uses indigenous medicine colors. In addition to indigenous medicine colors, what is referred to in the market as the scare eye or the repellent eye, it's uncannily similar to an eye iconography that has been traded from South America all the way to the northernmost part of northern North America since time immemorial, demonstrating a long view history of trade throughout the Americas. For a lot of people, the eye, not to be confused with the evil eye, in Turkey, but this eye is a lot about knowledge. And for post-commodity, it's really not about scaring things. It's about having consciousness. It's about building consciousness about things. So it's an open eye as opposed to a scare eye. It's an eye that is open. It's an eye that brings about some kind of awareness. Let's move forward. So we have a balloon that's both a spiritual mediator, an indigenous spiritual mediator, while at the same time an ineffectual byproduct of fast capitalism. We were really fascinated with this object, so we made a large version, like 10-foot in diameter version of it. And we just started doing a series of sketches, a series of studies, like taking it in different places and flying it. And just sort of asking people what they thought it was, trying to get an idea of what it is. And we found that people are very attracted to it. And that people, that it brought people a lot of joy. And it was, surreal and comical, and especially when we shared the narrative that I shared with you, people seemed to enjoy it even more. And so we decided, well, let's try to put this balloon to the test. We know that it didn't work on birds, but we flew it over Phoenix, and the city of Phoenix in 2008. Post Commodity was founded in the southwestern United States in 2007. And we flew it over the office of then Sheriff Joe Arpaio. If any of you know who Sheriff Joe Arpaio is. But he was a white supremacist who was the sheriff in Maricopa County really at the turn of the century, and was responsible for having violated the constitutional rights of citizens of Arizona by raiding establishments and racially profiling Latinx people and anybody brown, anybody who appeared, ethnically brown would get racially profiled by this man. He was indicted by the federal government and had become a convicted felon. And then several months after his conviction, Donald Trump was elected president, and he pardoned Joe Arpaio and thanked him for the wonderful job he's done for our nation. Anyway, our goal was to hang it right over his office in hopes that not only might we scare Sheriff Joe away, but maybe we just scare the whole lot of Western civilization. But since it's an ineffectual bird repellent product, it didn't really work out too well. We flew it in other places like Manitoba Hydroelectric Company up in Canada, a company responsible for having flooded Indigenous people's homelands. We got to fly it in their corporate headquarters lobby. We got to set it up so that they would fill the balloon every morning. The heads of the corporation, and have to lift it. It became a kind of watchful eye and facilitated a dialogue that was about a commitment to not to commit those crimes in the future. So we started learning how this thing can be used, like it can be leveraged politically in interesting ways. We're starting to become more and more knowledgeable. And we had also had very early on, one of the very first, if not the first post-commodity idea was to fly these balloons at the US-Mexico border. And so I want to share with you a story behind the story that not a lot of people get to hear. But since we're in an Indigenous Studies program, I think this is an appropriate place to share some secrets. When we were starting this, I consider myself, I was like a kid, I was in my 20s, late 20s, early 30s, and we're a collective of Indigenous men, like, hey, we're gonna fucking guerrilla this shit, And that's the thinking of a young person. That's the thinking of a young person. Maybe people have really good hearts, and maybe somehow well-intentioned, and maybe in the sense that we were seeking some form of justice, and we see a lot of kind of interventionist activities in art. But as we matured and we thought more about this project, we realized that those activities can be quite ineffectual themselves. And we also realized that it was not only naive in the sense that it's a kind of very non-generative approach to do something like that, but it also, all of this is run by ranchers, by cartels, by the border patrol, by militias. It's just layered with organizations who are heavily armed and in conflict with one another. One could say that the U.S.-Mexico border is one of the most geospatially contested military zones in the Western Hemisphere. And you can see a part of the border here just kind of going across, and those are called its Normandy barriers, inspired by the storming of Normandy and these structures that were built during World War II. So even if we thought we could have done it guerrilla style, no way. These lands are under intense 24-hour surveillance. So we decided, okay, we need to get permission. And what does it mean to get permission? Well, we started to remember where we were from as Indigenous people. We started remembering, we would never do anything, for example, like in our pueblos or tribes or communities without asking for permission. And so we started to realize the value of Indigenous knowledge systems and the ways in which we were raised and how we needed to do things so that they honored our families. So we started asking for permission. Still really naive if you think about it. We started up in Yuma, and we would just go from town to town all the way across the Arizona-Sonora border, explaining this idea that we wanted to do a big land art project with these scare eye balloons, and we wanted it to intersect the US-Mexico border. And so people would kind of sometimes laugh, sometimes very politely nudge us along. But what we were also doing is that we were learning to communicate. We were learning to ask for permission, but we are also mapping power along the way. We are also understanding the border, and we were seeing it as a kind of market complex, a very, very sophisticated marketplace. And so we came all along the border. We got to go to, it says up there, Papago Indian Reservation, but that's a Tohono O'odham nation. And we got to meet with them. All of this border, a large part of this border, this area here, is the ancestral homelands of the Tohono O'odham Nation. And the thing that's important about the Tohono O'odham Nation is that they're one of many nations that are split by the U.S.-Mexico border, where the tribe is on both sides of the border, which makes tribal cohesion very, very difficult, because you're not only dealing with the border and dealing with the federal government in relationship to that border so that the people can be together, but there's other problems. There's like linguistic barriers. It's just so many things. There's also chauvinisms, national chauvinisms that cause a lot of conflict. But we got to have conversations with Tohono O'odham Cultural Center, and got to hear a lot of stories and got to learn. And eventually came to, when we were almost to run out of Arizona border, to Douglas and Agua Prieta, where we communicated our idea, or presented our idea to the Mexican consulate in Douglas. And he was like the first person we met who didn't look at us like we were crazy. He started to engage. He thought it was very interesting. And then he said, I want you to go meet the mayor. He owns the shoe shop right down the street. He's actually working right now. You should go meet him. Tell him that I sent you. And so then we went to go meet the mayor. And then the mayor perked up. And the mayor was like, whoa, yeah, this is really interesting. What we realized is that what was required of a large-scale ephemeral monument that would bisect the U.S.-Mexico border was a sort of political Goldilocks zone, if you will. It had to be the place where all the politics, where the soup, the political soup, was just right, you know? And we would come to learn what that was. And I'll share it with you in a little while. But after 10 years of fundraising and really 3 years of very intense trans-border diplomacy, we would come to achieve this work of art called Repellent Fence via Repelente. And so just a few facts. Repellent Fence is 2 miles long. It's comprised of 26 balloons, all flying at an average of 100 feet above the desert landscape, the desert floor. It was a multilingual manifestation, again, of 3 years of intense binational diplomacy. Multilingual, meaning indigenous languages of Arizona and Sonora. It was Spanish, English, and then there were languages from abroad. People would come in to be a part of this. And what it represents is 4 days of indigenous reimagined ceremony. So these balloons were up for 4 days, during which the cities of Douglas, Arizona and Agua Prieta, Sonora positioned the work as a suture situating the Americas together. So it wasn't post-commodity that determined the meaning of this work. It was the people themselves who taught post-commodity what this meant. And it was also the people who chose themselves for Indigenous Reimagined Ceremony, reinscribing their memory upon the land as a singular city and people, and building a new public memory around their mestizaje where they were reconnecting to their indigenous ancestors who are largely described or oftentimes described as vanished, which is not the case. They are the Opata. And so it was a very emotional memory to evoke, a very emancipatory memory. Now, something that's really important about repellent fence, think about how hard it is to communicate in a language. Like let's say we're all speaking English here, and we're going to try to negotiate some kind of consensus in the context of something, a political context, the context of a political context. We're going to try to negotiate something in a political context that represents broad disagreements amongst ourselves. Think about how hard that is to do in English, but we had to do it in like half a dozen languages. By using the power of indigenous knowledge systems, our oral traditions, we struck over a dozen agreements while fully abandoning the reading and writing. We all know how that went. The signing of documents, we all know how that went. It didn't go very good. It didn't go very well. This time, we're not signing anything. This has to happen through oral tradition. This has to happen through ceremony. This has to happen through feeding, through food, through relationship building. And so we use the critical indigenous research methodologies framework to initiate the relationship building process. Those are by scholar Brian Brayboy and his colleagues, as well as Native leader LaDonna Harris, who also puts forth an idea of the 4 R's. From the perspective of research, those 4 R's are respect, relationships, reciprocity, and responsibility. And so everything we did, we ensured that it was encoded with those 4 R's, or that it encoded those 4 R's. And what was the result? The result was a 100% success rate in every single agreement, trans-border agreement struck. Not one single agreement failed. In fact, because we live in such a litigious society in the United States, we are required to have to insure the thing. Insurers did not want to work with us because we didn't have any written agreements with anybody. And so after a while, we were able to broker a policy through the Native Arts and Cultures Foundation. But I think some things to consider. What happens when you bring the 4 R's to the table is that what post-commodity shows is that when people really care about a place, even if they hate one another, when people really care about a place, don't underestimate the power of the human spirit. And what we showed is that if you can, through the power of the 4 R's, what is possible in the context of the right political conditions, it's possible that people can learn that to rival one another doesn't have to mean pointing guns at each other and lobbing knife tongues at each other. That rivaling can actually be a place of productive inquiry and productive action. And so at the end of the day, what you saw was the manifestation of all these rival stakeholders reaching an agreement to stop business as usual for 4 days to think about the US-Mexico border through dialogue, as opposed to hatred. So our role, which is different than most border art, was to take a stand for knowledge. It wasn't to protest. That's what we thought we were gonna, that's where we were as younger people, and that's where we ended. That had profound political implications for the cities of Douglas and Agua Prieta. It required them to have to collaborate with one another. They became so good at it that they don't do anything programmatically at a public cultural level without collaborating. So every fiesta, every native ceremony happens right at the border fence, having been organized through transborder action. What was the political soup? The political soup was that these towns used to, people used to gather in the city to race horses. And this had been going on for several decades before Nixon's war on drugs, which was the excuse for the first version of the fence. And so as the fence started growing and getting taller and bigger, more menacing and more, the horse races started to vanish. But there was still a memory of people coming together. That memory had led to a memorandum of understanding between the two cities, stating that they would make an effort to work across all sectors of society, cultural, economic, political, and so forth, to collaborate with one another in an effort to try to remain a singular city bisected by a fence. Post-commodities repellent fence became the first opportunity the cities had to try to operationalize that memorandum of understanding. And that's how it ended up happening. And that's why it happened. And so I'm just going to breeze through a couple more slides so we can open it up to maybe a few questions or however this is going to unfold. But I want you to look at this image here. This is an image that was photographed at Standing Rock, and up on the hill there are water protectors, and down below a militarized police unit and a person at a gun turret. Only that's not a gun, that's what's called an LRAD, which is a long-range acoustic device. And this acoustic device emits hyperdirectional sound, meaning like it's like a sonic ray gun, if you will. And it's used for communication, but it also has a kind of deafening and chilling effect on our right to public demonstration. Because when this thing is fired at you, it turns your body into a resonator, and you can hear the sound from within, while at the same time being able to discern the direction the sound is coming from. It can cause tissue damage. It can cause head concussions. It's so unnatural and so painful at extremely high volumes that you would probably try to run yourself through a concrete wall to get away from it. You would create an act of desperation, this real flight instinct in each and every one of us if we were targeted by this instrument of terror. And so when we were commissioned for Documenta 14, we immediately, we couldn't find these at Home Depot. They weren't on Amazon either, but we did manage to acquire a pair through eBay. And so we put these LRADs, we mounted them to the rooftops, in Athens, Greece, overlooking Aristotle's Lyceum. Now this is the site, this is where Aristotle used to teach. This is where the frameworks for empiricism were birthed. The scientific method. So the earliest frameworks of what eventually became the scientific method were imagined here. The first book of rhetoric was written here. The humanities, botany, rhetoric, literacy, literature. They were established in a library here. And Aristotle would walk with his students around the campus because he believed in peripatetic learning, that knowledge was in motion, therefore the body should be in motion with knowledge. And we thought that that was a really interesting idea, considering that at the time there was 65 million people walking, migrating in the world. So, you know, Aristotle had an idea that the learners and the scholars were those who were on the move. And so we thought, wow, there's like 65 million professors on the move in the world right now. And we have the Lyceum. And this is an opportunity to reanimate this site of pedagogy after thousands of years. So we proposed the idea, and it didn't go too well. The government of Greece is on the record as saying, well, what do Indians know about Aristotle anyway? And hell no. Now, if you think about this, one of the reasons why we were attracted to it is because I'm from New Mexico. And part of where I'm from are the pueblos. And this reminded me of my home. And in fact, when I got really close to it, it was like, wow, really, really uncannily similar building techniques. And so they said no, but the Documenta was able to get them to forestall their decision. I was flown out there. The collective asked if I would go. I have a PhD in linguistics and rhetoric. So they're like, you better go. This is like it. This is it. So I took everything I learned from repellent fence and everything I had studied in linguistics and rhetoric to Greece. And I did it like this, red eye. I spent a day with a cultural mentor. And then the second day I had to testify before the government of Greece for permission. And I'll tell you something. It was a pretty amazing experience because when I walked in that room, it was a council of elders. And I seen their faces before. Their faces were the faces of my grandparents, looking at me disapprovingly when I was like about 9 years old and I did something I wasn't supposed to do. And it scared the hell out of me. And but anyway, what happened was, I'm telling you the story because we're humans. We're all humans, and stories are powerful. Stories make the world. And so after a lot of back and forth, start very antagonistic, and then it got very humorous, and then it got to some kind of philosophical banter. And what ended up happening was, I explained to them that we were aware of their remarks that went on the public record, and that I'm pretty sure that if somebody from Greece came to the Southwest and went to one of the 8 northern Indian pueblos and said, hey, we want to put a contemporary art piece on one of your sacred sites, I think the Pueblo people might have even said something worse. And so I explained that, like, hey, I want to apologize because we don't mean to be disrespectful. We're interested in the idea of taking a stand for some of the higher ideals, and acknowledging that Aristotle is a really complicated person. He's a really problematic person. But we want to encourage you not to turn your backs on the higher ideas that he brought to the world. This is only a few hours from the Greek-Macedonia border, where at that time there were tens of thousands of Syrian refugees, and Greece is experiencing intense pressure from the European Union, who gutted them economically, by the way, to take refugees. So it was politically tense. Not the goal. Yeah, I guess there was a Goldilocks zone. We found it, but we found it through humor. And so that's the importance. That's another takeaway, is the importance of humor in story. But we did get permission. And what resulted of it is that we took this instrument of terror, something that we saw as very ugly, and we inverted it and reimagined it as an instrument of beauty. And we wrote a 4-act opera based on the narratives of Indigenous Americans and Syrian refugees, people, African refugees, people from all over the world. And their stories were non-damage centered narratives. We had just about had enough of that. All we asked if people would be compelled to share with us what it's like to walk, what it's like to be on the land, and what it's like to walk for great distances on land. And that's what the opera was about, referencing Aristotle's peripatetic learning. We focused the beams on the trail he would walk with his students to beckon the audience to walk the path. And the musics were from all over the world. I'm almost to wrap here. So to conclude, I want to share with you a work that I think demonstrates one of the greatest intentions and legibility of our aspirations as a collective. And we in the collective have a lot of different ideas about what our works are about. So I want to share with you a sort of personal thinking on it. But you know, for me, it represents a vision of art's role in engaging social, political, cultural, and economic issues. And it's not to be didactic, and it's not to be propagandist or to feed into partisanship, but that to us it's about mediating complexity, like resisting the basic human instinct to produce oversimplified models, tacit models of the world by which we're surrounded, but to create something that is complicated, non-parochial, non-puritanical, just noisy, if you will. But that the idea is that perhaps that within that noise we may come to see something we can't otherwise view through other means. And so this piece is called Blind Curtain. It also uses hyperdirectional speakers emitting pink noise. And this was installed in Kassel, Germany. It's a blind curtain, a gift and blessing to the visitors of Documenta 14 from Post-Commodity. The installation acts as a threshold for audiences to cleanse themselves of the outside world and prepare their hearts, minds, and spirits for engaging the transformative experience of Documenta 14. And in this regard, Blind Curtain is a physical and conceptual threshold for demarcating outside and inside and acknowledging and reifying spaces and artworks of Documenta 14, as well as spaces and contexts between. Simultaneously, Blind Curtain is aware of itself as a node of power. It is a determiner of space, a border. It is a membrane constructed of pink noise. Blind Curtain is a human dilemma that contains secrets, provides access, creates the illusion of privacy, prevents access, provokes surveillance, and embodies love. And so what it is that there's a curtain of sound. And if we listen to the room right now, do you hear that? When you enter into the museum, you pass through that sound like a waterfall, and you emerge on the other end. So this is for the students. So the distinction of my work as an artist is that I work collaboratively, but not in service of democracy, but as acts of indigenous, cultural, and local community self-determination for the purposes of aestheticizing and mediating complexity. Mediating complexity and effective art pedagogy requires generosity, diplomacy, learning, stewardship, reciprocity, respect, rigor, scholarship, strong literacy skills, collaboration, the humanities, patience, relationships, accountability, co-determination, self-implication, and listening. One has to believe in the power of connected knowledge, not just Western knowledge, not just indigenous knowledge, but knowledge is connected. They don't always connect well, but in some respects, in some places, they overlap. Being generative, and most importantly, being humble. My vision and that of my collaborators is to use contemporary art to create portals With these portals, we, for a brief moment, reconfigure time and place so that we may pry the world open and give ourselves a chance to look at and appreciate the simple complexity of life. Perhaps in aestheticizing complexity, we can catalyze publics to realize that partisanship in this country has desocialized us from one another and disciplined us away from consensus. The work of Radio Healer and Post Commodity is not political protest, but is instead designed so that through our relationship with land, place, and each other, we may recover knowledge, generate new knowledge, and share knowledge at sites of contest, controversy, conflict, and consequence. In my work, I aim to disarm these sites and reimagine them as places of curiosity, where rivals who are amenable to transformation can come together to engage in joint inquiry. To conduct my work, I aspire to move away from the colonial legacies of rhetorically brutal critiques, often positioned as quote-unquote supportive, at the center of arts pedagogy in today's global capitalism. I aspire to acknowledge the genocidal visual culture and sonic warfare in the United States, born of Manifest Destiny, which so many of us unwittingly play under the guise of freedom in art school and institutions. My work is to flip the script on a largely non-inclusive art world where peoples of color are all too often encouraged to obsess about and dramatize their identities for the theoretical and racializing gaze of the powerful and privileged. In terms of theoretical gazes, I am implicated here. Yes, I am a brown person, but I'm also Dr. Martinez. In terms of racism, I am a brown person, and critical theories of race presuppose that part of our reality is that we, people of color, can be hegemonic. Despite dilemmas and our complicated humanity, my aspirations are to educate the art world's future thought leaders, regardless of background or identity, and to encourage all students to think about human challenges and problems that exist beyond just mere identity politics during this time of climate change and systems stresses. To practice and teach a rhetorically thoughtful and generative art about the world, both from and beyond the self, so that we might gain the capacity to bless and dignify each other, so that we may offer each other as a functional family our gifts of difference to one another, so that maybe in that moment we may see ourselves and each other in a new way and as new again. Thank you. Thank you so much. Now, I want to congratulate you